Okay, let's dive into a really big and honestly a really controversial idea. What if the main driver of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East wasn't actually American interests? That is the explosive argument right at the center of the 2007 book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the book's thesis, sticking just to what the authors themselves actually argued.
The entire book really is an attempt to answer one massive question. What is the actual impact of the pro-Israel lobby on U.S. foreign policy? And, maybe more importantly, do the results of that impact really serve America's own national interest?
And look, the guys who wrote this are not fringe commentators. We're talking about John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, absolute heavyweights in international relations from the University of Chicago and Harvard. Their elite status is a big reason why their arguments, as provocative as they were, couldn't just be brushed aside and ended up creating such a huge firestorm. So here it is, the core argument in a nutshell. Mearsheimer and Walt claim that a really diverse and powerful coalition has successfully pushed U.S. policy in the Middle East in a direction that is so consistently pro-Israel that it sometimes, they argue, works against what they defined as America's own strategic interests. And just how much influence are we talking about here? Well, they make this pretty stunning claim about the 2003 invasion of Iraq. They say the lobby's push was a necessary but not sufficient condition for war. Now, what does that mean? Basically, they're arguing that while other factors were involved, without the years of pressure from this group for regime change, the war probably wouldn't have happened. It is a massive assertion, and it becomes one of the book's main case studies.
But before we go any deeper, we have to get really clear on what the authors actually mean when they use the term the lobby. This is probably the most important and definitely the most misunderstood part of their whole argument. They are very, very explicit about this. They are not talking about a conspiracy. There's no secret cabal in a smoke-filled room. They define the lobby as a loose coalition of different people and different organizations. These groups might disagree on 100 other things, but they share one core goal: steering U.S. foreign policy in a pro-Israel direction. And the coalition they describe is incredibly broad. It's not just one group. Yeah, they point to organizations like AIPAC, but they also include powerful Christian Zionists, influential neoconservative thinkers working inside the government, media commentators, and of course, major political donors. For Mearsheimer and Walt, the lobby's real strength comes from this very diversity. So, the big question is, how does this influence actually work in the real world? Well, the authors lay out a kind of playbook, a set of tactics they say are used to shape policy in Congress, in the White House, and even in the court of public opinion. In Congress, for example, they argue the strategy has a bunch of different parts. Sure, campaign funding is a big piece of it, but it's also about mobilizing voters, organizing letter-writing campaigns, and applying public pressure. The goal is pretty straightforward: reward your allies and, just as crucially, make sure anyone who is critical of Israeli policy faces serious political consequences, sometimes even a well-funded challenger in their next primary. And to back this up, the authors point to moments like this one from former Senator John Culver. Talking about why he caved on a letter to the Ford administration back in the day, he just put it bluntly: the pressure was just too great. I caved. It's that kind of stark admission the book uses to show the real-world effects of this pressure.
Now, this influence, the authors claim, doesn't just stop in the halls of Congress. They argue it stretches out to shape the public debate itself. They present data like this chart here, where they analyze the opinion pages of major newspapers to show what they see as a huge imbalance. You have a media landscape with lots of columnists consistently defending Israeli policy, and very, very few offering consistent critiques.
Okay, so to bring their whole thesis together, to really show it in action, the authors zoom in on one single huge event: the 2003 invasion of Iraq. They use it as their main example of how the lobby, as they define it, helped push America into a war that it might have otherwise skipped.
This quote from journalist Joe Klein really gets to the heart of their argument here. Mearsheimer and Walt believe that underneath all the public justifications for the war, there was this key unspoken driver: the belief that taking out Saddam Hussein and totally reshaping the region would, in the end, make Israel much more secure.
And the book names names. They point directly to key figures inside the Bush administration, people like Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl. They argue that these officials, many of whom had wanted war with Iraq for years, basically used the political chaos after 9/11 to finally make it happen by linking Saddam Hussein to the new war on terror.
So the crucial point the authors are trying to make is this: the public reasons for war, WMDs and all that, that wasn't the full picture.
They argue the much bigger strategic prize was a radical reordering of the entire Middle East, a massive project that its advocates believed would serve both American and especially Israeli security interests.
So, after all this analysis, after pages and pages of evidence, what's the author's final takeaway? Well, it's not really a policy prescription. It's more of a call for something they believe has been sorely missing: a truly open and honest debate.
Their stated goal was to basically spark a national conversation. Mearsheimer and Walt argue that for decades, having a frank discussion about the U.S.-Israel relationship has been like touching the third rail of American politics. They hoped their book would finally break that taboo and open the door for a more critical public debate.
And that really brings us to the final takeaway from their work. Whether you agree with their conclusions or find them completely wrong, the book leaves us with a pretty provocative question. In a democracy, should any topic really be off limits for debate? And what happens to our foreign policy when one is?